December 9, 2025. Inside the Banque de France, a routine scheduling conflict was about to derail the global financial system. 6 top bureaucrats sat around a mahogany table. You had the Governor, Marguerite Dubois, projecting ruthless control. You had a panicked political liaison, a cynical representative for the commercial banks, and an eccentric philosopher who nobody remembered inviting. They were waiting for a standard quarterly stability report. This diagram illustrates exactly what they were supposed to be reviewing: the vulnerability of modern global finance. Our current system operates on a binary loop. A transaction happens, regulators ask, is it compliant? And the algorithm outputs a yes or a no. But this relies entirely on compliance by trust, taking the word of the institution being monitored. Because the system is binary, it is forced to clear transactions even when data is ambiguous. High-frequency algorithms use that ambiguity to hide market manipulation, slipping illicit trades through the unverified gaps before human regulators can even react. But the stability report never arrived. Instead, an exhausted intern grabbed the wrong binder from document services and dropped a 40-page technical specification in front of the governor. It was titled The Architecture of Assured Governance, written by a dying software architect named Lev Goukassian. Marguerite opened the binder and began to read. Within minutes, the room went silent. She realized this wasn't a standard report or a policy suggestion. It was a technical blueprint that made every stability metric they currently used look like a work of fiction. The first pillar detailed in the binder was a concept called the Epistemic Hold. Ternary Logic breaks the binary loop. Instead of forcing a choice between proceed and refuse, it introduces a third state: the epistemic hold. When detecting data ambiguity, it physically freezes the transaction in the zero state until human oversight resolves the conflict. Michel, the resident philosopher, read this and nearly lost his mind. To him, the code had achieved Cartesian radical doubt. I think, therefore I pause. The software was admitting its own uncertainty. By mandating a physical pause when truth is unclear, the architecture strips away exact gray areas that allow institutional fraud to maintain its forward momentum. But Antoine, the commercial banking representative, recognized the real danger. The threat wasn't the pause itself. The threat was what happened after the pause. This demonstrates the immutable ledger. Every epistemic hold generates a cryptographically hashed decision log, locking the exact variance into an undeletable chain. If an executive overrides the hold, their identity and action leave a permanent fingerprint anchored to a public blockchain. Panic set in around the table. The bureaucrats realized that under this framework, every manipulated market move, every hidden bribe, and every forced transaction would now leave an undeniable, trackable footprint. The architecture makes human corruption mathematically non-repudiable. A piece of software had just been weaponized into a relentless prosecutor. Then came the final realization, courtesy of the regulator in the room. The system was designed with no off switch. There was no executive override for the core mandates. The system is governed by a triadic smart contract, enforcing the Goukassian Vow. It dictates a mandatory ethical standard of care for all automated decisions. Michel realized the architect had achieved the impossible. The code physically enforced the French ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity through cryptographic locksteps. Ethics were no longer abstract human aspirations or regulatory suggestions. They were executable, inescapable computational law. Antoine demanded they destroy the binder. Implementing ternary logic would expose every historical irregularity in French banking and cost billions in immediate compliance overhauls. Look at this chart mapping the global market share of European banks. Governor Marguerite Dubois knew they were already bleeding out. French and European financial sectors were rapidly losing ground to American tech giants and Asian infrastructure banks. She saw an entirely different outcome. If France adopted ternary logic first, they wouldn't just be auditing themselves. They would create an unassailable competitive moat: cryptographic trust. Capital would naturally flow to the only system that could mathematically prove its own integrity. Ignoring the threats from the Banking Federation, Marguerite authorized a live pilot program right there at the table. If a nation wants to survive the future of algorithmic finance, it cannot hide its flaws in the shadows. It must aggressively monopolize verified truth. That night, the president of France was briefed. By morning, the government officially rolled out l'Initiative de Transparence. Within weeks, the balance of power in European finance shifted so violently that institutions in Frankfurt requested the technical specifications just to keep up. When asked to justify the chaos she had unleashed on her own banking sector, the governor's logic was remarkably simple. Revolutions are never cheap, but the alternative is obsolescence. It is a profound irony of history. A global standard of verified capitalism was birthed not by a committee, but because a dying man's manifesto landed on the desk of a governor who was finally willing to use it.